By my clock, it says 12:06. I'll try to go to what, 12:45?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, well then here we go. Welcome, everybody. I'm kind of going to talk today about group therapy basics, but I'm also going to start by saying in the time of COVID-19, it's a very weird time in our country. We're suffering at least three plagues from my perspective. We have the plague of the coronavirus, which is being just horribly handled. We have a problem with science rejection, and I think that's a second plague, because it's very clear that if we were to behave correctly, we would be much more like other countries, like the kid I grew up with who went down to New Zealand and has no issues because New Zealand handled it. And the third plague is systemic racism. I think that's a huge factor, and I don't know about you all, but absolutely every group I deal with, and I deal with a lot of groups, are addressing this factor. It is bubbling over in our culture. So I think we're going to talk about group. We got to mention those three things. I am concerned that with the recent history, that there's a problem with adherence to basic science, which is increasingly threatening the public health of Florida. We are in deep trouble here. The news of the last 3 days really bothers me. And the face-to-face practice of group psychotherapy may exceed current recommendations for social distancing, which further suggests the importance of telehealth. I don't think we should be doing group therapy face-to-face. We're not going to do it at the University Counseling Center this fall. At least until Christmas, we're not going to do it. You can hear the scientists with the proper training and the proper medical background telling us that not to keep your social sphere small, well less than 10. Groups run best at 7, 8, 9, plus a couple of leaders, that gets us over 10. I don't think we should be doing group therapy, and I'm going to be speaking with the American Group Psychotherapy Association. I.M. Weinberg put together a panel, and I'll talk next month on that, and I'm going to put my foot down. I'm going to say we shouldn't be doing this, because we're supposed to be mental health professionals, and we have no background in epidemiology. We have no background in infection control, and we don't operate in buildings that were designed for infection control. So I think we have a big issue here. It scares me when I look on the Florida server and I see informal discussion about how I can make my office COVID safe. I don't know how we could do that. So I think that's really important. University Counseling Center at Florida State began to function 100% online, telehealth format on Monday, March 23rd on the return from spring break. We're now in the 14th week and will likely carry telehealth to what my boss said this morning into the unforeseeable future. And again, look at those numbers in Florida. I don't know what the Board of Governors is going to do with the 12 universities. We'll just see. So we were running 30 groups at spring break, and we're now into the lower 30s. We've gained 3 groups. I myself run 5 groups a week with 4 interns and a colleague. And as of this, I've run 62 telehealth groups since March 23rd. So I do 2 undergrad groups Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday and Friday morning and Friday afternoon. I do grad groups. I do 4 of them with doc interns, and I always have a colleague I'm working with. And I'm teaching group therapy too. It's a good situation. We have very good evidence that telehealth works in the online format, and that most of the best practices for establishing groups, everything translates from face to face. And today we're going to talk about building group interventions and some of the steps we go through. So the first step, if you are is anybody here dreaming of starting a new group? I see, yeah. So I'm actually in the process of going through a new collaboration. And so I'm speaking with my collaborator about the new group. And one of the things we need to know is, what's the purpose? Who are we going to treat? What's my dream? Because a group therapy intervention is a socially constructed reality that the group therapist constructs out of their own mind. And we invite people into a space that we mandate, control, and oversee. We set the rules. We determine who's in there. We determine what happens there. It's our responsibility. A group therapy environment can be a hugely intense circumstance in that we capture things from the present and we capture things from the past. Frequently, people talk about the experience of finding their family of origin, finding their marriage, finding their relationships in the group therapy that they're in, and that they tend to work on things in the group therapy that have tremendous reflection to their external life, past and present. And perhaps we're even impacting the future by developing people and assisting them in being what they truly want to be. So treatment plans are very important because for the most part, we don't meet people in group. We meet people in face-to-face consultations. We do an initial consult, and then perhaps we take someone into treatment. The accreditation of group therapy by the American Psychological Association, which occurred a couple of years ago, was about a 20 plus year campaign. We had a lot of petitions that didn't prevail. That petition does not certify or accredit any given theoretical orientation. What it does is it accredits a series of procedures that people go through, which are best practices. And selection and preparation, which we're talking about today, is where that all gets started. And the first big question is what kind of a group do you want? So we have to think about a group as an intervention, as a solution to a given issue. Because if you're going to do a grief group, it's really different than if you're going to do a process group for people who have issues from their family of origin, or if you want to bring together anxious people or depressed people, or you want to do an empowerment group for a given subpopulation. Each of those decisions informs who we're looking for, how we're going to conduct ourselves, and what the procedures will be. Before we get into all that, I want to talk a little bit about what I call the problem of anxiety, because I think anxiety is probably the largest central feature of group therapy. Anybody ever get anxious in the group room? Absolutely. So it's normal. We're all copping to it. So, there's anxiety on the part of the leader. Do you know what you're treating? Do you know where and how to do this treatment? Are you the best practitioner for the case? Do you have a sense about what's going on with him and what's needed? I think group therapists experience tremendous amounts of anxiety. When things go amiss, decisions to be made, ramifications. Am I going to do this group alone or am I going to do this with somebody else? Well, let's see. If I do it alone, I get all the dollars. That's really good. I only get half of the dollars if I have a 50-50 rapport. Is this going to be something that's within my wheelhouse, or am I pushing a limit? Do I need a mentor? Do I need a supervisor? Do I need a consultant? So I think all of the issues about the leader looking at their group is about the leader's anxiety and the burden that they carry. I think we have anxiety on the part of the referral source. Many people refer commonly to groups, and many people don't. Communities of group therapists, like we're trying to get going here with FGPS, are fabulous. I've practiced my entire life in communities of group therapists. And I'll tell you, even in the horrible times of managed care in Southern California, which is where it got started, it got pretty bleak as dollars became so low that it just wasn't worth being in business. Group therapists never had trouble because we're always referring to each other. And group therapy pays pretty well and doesn't cost that much for a given individual. So, referral becomes very important. And then there's anxiety on the part of the patient. You want me to talk about my personal issues in front of other people? Are you nuts? Has anyone had an interview with someone where you're proposing a group and they look at you and take exception? Pretty common experience for me because we're making recommendations. Uh-oh, I've frozen. Making recommendations to people to go into groups. So I think the anxiety on the part of the potential group member is a huge, huge factor, which we need to consider. And then those of us who work in institutions, we have our directors or our administration who have to deal with their anxiety. I want to do this intervention, but maybe the director doesn't.
Josh, you're freezing up. I don't know if you can hear us.
I'm sorry?
I'm gonna, no.
I'm sorry, someone's speaking. Okay. So anxiety on the part of the administration. So I think there's 4 factors that we need to deal with. Ourselves as group leaders, our referral source. And that becomes important when we want to kind of expand our business and get people to make a referral to us. We have to recognize that other mental health professionals are protective about their cases and the work achieved thus far. And many of them are anxious about making a referral, and we want to address that. The people we treat are clearly anxious and have issues about making disclosures, perhaps to an individual rather than to a body of individuals. And then the administrators who oversee all of this stuff. So as we look at an individual for membership in a group, there's some things we want to consider. Is this person in crisis and needing more individualized attention? Or are they in a condition where I've met them for a while, we've been talking about a characteristic, a personality, a pattern of relationships that they may wish to make a change in? I think that the individual case making the transition into group faces a fair piece of anxiety because it's a very different deal talking to one of us than to talking to a group of peers. And you want to be sure that they're ready for that. I think you want to ask yourself, do impulse control problems suggest difficulties that would be better managed in a group, perhaps for behavior? Because a general process group, which we're going to talk about composition in a few minutes, selects differently than a group that is psychoeducational and time limited. So if someone's got an anxiety process and you're putting them into a group that may run 8-10 visits, that has a curriculum, and when they finish the group, they've got some basic knowledge, and if they're doing well in group, you may refer them to a process group to carry on some of that discussion work. You want to make a decision about whether someone wants a psychoeducational experience or do they want really an open-ended process experience. And we're going to talk more about those two as choices. Is the person really ready for interpersonal relatedness? Because we put people in groups and it stresses them some. And a premature referral to group can go poorly. So you really want to know your case. In the olden days, people were, when I say olden days, I mean like in the 1950s, 1970s, 1990s, people were commonly in group for individual treatment for long periods of time before they were referred to group. In the time of managed care and the acceleration of treatment plans where we're trying to get outcomes in small handfuls of sessions, we're sending people to group more frequently. I don't know that it's not working well, but I think sometimes it's really hard on our group members. The University Counseling Center, we do a tremendous amount of referral to group, and we found that the students really like that. And given the choice, they commonly shed their individual therapists and remain in groups for series of semesters. And of course, is the person willing and able to agree to the group contract? Because the group contract, which we're going to talk about in some detail today, involves agreements surrounding confidentiality. And the practitioner has to be comfortable selecting people who are capable of honoring that. Because if there are violations in confidentiality, there's ramifications both to the condition of the group and perhaps even the legal status of the practice. We've had some fairly high-profile people in the last couple of years lose licenses due to issues of not protecting patient records. So these are very important concerns. And when you begin to mix people together, you have to keep your records right. We do individual records for all group members. So if someone gets subpoenaed, we subpoena that record. It may well be that they're in group and we have notes for group, but we're not referencing other group members' material in those notes. Same thing we do with couples. We keep two records, one for the spouse A and one for the spouse B, and we keep our data separate. So, can everyone be in group, or are there contraindications to group, folks?
Contraindications.
Give me a good one. What's a great contraindication in that VA of a guy you won't refer to group?
Well, I work in mental health, so we have a separate section for substance abuse. So if they're actively and I mean, really hitting it hard as far as the alcohol, the drugs, then I won't include them in my group.
Okay, so you're going to set a limit with intoxication problems. You want that under control. Okay.
Yep.
Anyone else got one? What's a good rule out for you?
High suicidal ideation.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to be doing suicide evaluations after group all the time. Absolutely. And it puts the group on anxious status. Someone else got one.
I guess maybe psychosis if someone is really actively psychotic.
You know, I think so. But on the other hand, I have done many groups where everyone is psychotic. So, you know, I think it's what the mixture is. So
Exactly.
in general psychiatric hospital, we do psychotic groups. But, you know, in college counseling center, if you've got a kid who's an eccentric kid who's hallucinating, not dangerous, still functioning well enough, but maybe leading an eccentric lifestyle, if you got a chronic mental illness group, sure. But I think that's very important, Carol. I thank you for that. That's really good. One that I think about a lot is we have kids who are on the autism spectrum. And I think, again, you want one person on the autism spectrum in a group could be a bad circumstance for that person. But if you have a group of them, I think it can be a fine circumstance. So again, as you are weaving together lifestyles, individuals, and you're forming groups, you're engaging in group composition, you want to think about bringing out the best of everyone, as well as developing this larger group as a whole that's going to facilitate your working with these people. So what are you trying to build, and what do you want it to do? Well, that really depends. Because if I'm going to do, for instance, a grief group, grief group's really relevant right now. Thank goodness we have two grief groups running at Florida State, because I think we're going to be facing a lot more grief and mourning issues with the death rates escalating as they are. Grief group generally runs in a psychoeducational model. There's usually some curriculum, some discussion, and some processing. My friend Nina Brown, who writes the great book on psychoeducational groups, that's the name of that book. That's a really great book if you're interested in psychoeducational groups. She stresses that psychoeducational groups have a lot of process to them. That process is usually couched within educational frameworks. And these are really great groups to run in private practice because they fill easily and they're fairly concrete. They run a course, you go through a curriculum. It also helps you to groom individuals who come through that group with an appetite to talk more. Because if, let's say, you're charging $120 for an individual session, you can charge $40, $50 for a group. It's very attractive to someone. If you've got 6 or 8 people at $40 or $50, you're making decent dollars per hour. and your group members aren't paying all that much. So it's kind of a Robin Hood experience. You know, I translate that in my staff model circumstance at Florida State University. Since we're all on salary, we're not talking dollars, but what we are talking is full-time equivalencies. So for an instance, if I am doing a group with an intern and there's 2 of us, and group runs 90 minutes, and we do a half hour of notes, that's 2 hours. So we got to have better than 4 kids in our group so it runs at a profit, because they could do 2 kids in those 2 hours, and I could do 2 kids in those 2 hours, and between us, that's 4. So we're running a group at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, as we frequently do. We're running a profit for the agency. So group therapy can be nicely lucrative to the practitioner or to the institution that houses the groups. The real trick is to get the groups running. So we have a term we call homogeneity, and we pit it against the term heterogeneity. And what we're really talking about is how similar or dissimilar the people are in the given group. So we're going to talk on the one side about a psychoeducational model and the other about a process model. Psychoeducational, everybody walks in that group and then goes, oh, this is a group for mourning. You had a loss, I had a loss, we had a loss, kumbaya. Those groups accelerated at an alarming rate. Tremendous levels of disclosure in first meetings in psychoeducational groups because people realize, oh, I found my people. And that's a natural force that we as a group therapist want to take advantage of. So when we're selecting for a psychoeducational group, a group about the symptom that I have, everyone's got to have the symptom. That makes sense. So it's all about grief, or it's about queer empowerment, or it's about study habits, or it's about trauma recovery. Everybody's got the same issue. When we select for a group like that, we're wanting to be sure we have people who are compatible to group, but we also want to be sure that they've got that thing that we're treating. We also want to think about what the mixture is going to be, because if we have 7 Euro-American types and we drop in 1 person of color, they're going to feel perhaps a little more alienated. And one of the plagues we're dealing with is institutional racism. So we all got to get more sensitive about diversity, power differential, and how people are feeling about stuff. So I think selection becomes hugely important. We would want to rule somebody out who couldn't cooperate for that group. So maybe they had a psychotic process, maybe they had an autism process, maybe they just have a pattern of being hyperbolic or sarcastic. It's not going to fit in a grief and mourning situation. So the composition of a psychoeducational group is about homogeneity for symptom presentation, problem, homogeneity for ability to get along with others, and hopefully, if we have different types of people, that we have at least 2 of each type, so as not to leave people feeling marginalized. Now, a process group, which is called process group because it's not about the symptom and it's not about the circumstance. It's about how the heck I got to be the way I am, and am I happy with it? And if not, what can I do about it? The selection of people for a process group is highly different than the selection of people for a psychoeducational group. While with a psychoeducational group, we want homogeneity of presenting problem. In a process group, we want heterogeneity. We want someone with a love problem. We want someone with a work problem. We want someone with a behavior problem. We want someone with a sex problem. We want someone with a work habits problem. But we want similarity in their capacity to work together, their levels of intelligence, their levels of assertion, and their general tone. So if we're trying to build a group about what I got, we want them all the same, but compatible in terms of their features and presentation. If we're going to do a group about how the heck I got to be what I am today, we want a big range of problems so that we can talk about lots of different stories and lots of different examples, which will help the members of the group to see themselves from varying points of view. Does that make sense to people? Because I think the difference between the two is really essential. So when you decide you want to do a group, you got to decide which path you're going to walk. Am I going to walk the path of we're dealing with a given problem and everyone there's got it? Or am I dealing with general development issues through process? And then I want to select for a wide range of people who are fairly similar. Because if I've got 2 or 3 really megalomaniacal individuals who always need to be in control, the more gentle folk are going to be subject to them through your group. And you're probably going to end up having to shepherd and traffic control turbulence because of the tones that you brought in. Now, the learning is only through experience, and it gets easier as you do it. My general strategy with my interns who do 3 semesters, 50 groups with me, is that initially they're watching me do that. And when things go really well, like they did this year, as we started spring semester, I gave the control of selection and preparation to all of my interns. And then we make it to spring break, and then poof, we're in telehealth. How the heck did we do that? It was pretty easy, actually. We have a meeting every Wednesday morning called Group Admin, and everybody who does group goes there. So that first week, we were all like trying to get in touch with all our students and say, hey, we got this thing called Zoom, and we got these new forms, and we got this new website you're going to log into, and you're going to fill out all these forms, and then we're going to talk on TV to each other. And that's what we started doing. And on come Wednesday morning, 8:30, we did group admin, and I got my 40 people together. And you know what? We started running groups. As I said to you, we're running about 33 groups a week right now. Groups run great on telehealth. There's absolutely no issues that I can tell thus far. Okay, we got about 10 minutes here. I sent you all my 2 little very short pieces out of Scott Simon Fair's 101 Interventions books. One of them is the value of a checklist, and I want to go through a checklist because I think a checklist is a very time-honored way of managing a complex checkout. All pilots walk around and manipulate with their hands their airplane before they get into it and turn it on and fly it. It's a basic safety procedure, and I think that all group therapists should have a checklist. And I just wrote this up because I thought it was really good and simple. So to get going, you need to establish a primary alliance. You need to have a clear, common sense of your patient's diagnosis and what's up with them. You need to offer information and instruction regarding groups and what it's like. I think when you tell people about what their first session will be like, it's very useful. One of the tricks we use at the University Counseling Center when we're doing face-to-face is we would say, when you walk in the waiting room, look around and see if you know anybody. And then when the therapists walk up and a bunch of people stand up, now you know who that group is. Because we can't tell the potential new group member who the existing members are. And we can't tell the existing members who the new group member is. because of issues of confidentiality. And when you do just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups, things go wrong. We've had people walk into the group room a few minutes late because they couldn't get there on time, and a group member screams, "He can't come in here, he's my ex-boyfriend." And so, we manage the situation. It doesn't happen that much, but it's very difficult to figure out if a group member's ex-boyfriend is a potential new member. So, groups not for the meek. You got to be ready to handle these circumstances. We do a lot of preparation where we talk about various possibilities. The thing about the group room in Zoom is they're either in or they're not in. So we've had a few circumstances where someone's come in and we've had to get them out. But it's easy. The leader can operate the machine. And we always have had prior discussions with our students about, should that case occur, what we would do and how we would handle that. So if someone gets thrown out of a group because they can't be there, they'll have known that before. It'll be part of our selection, our preparation, and our interview procedures, getting them screened for group. I'd like to see, for any group intervention, a clear statement for the purpose of the group, which includes its goals, objectives, membership criteria, and time frame. All this is on that handout, so you can just print it off. They need a well-reasoned plan for location, schedule, clinical operations necessary to initiate the group. You need to distribute a written announcement to both colleagues and potential group members that describes what you're doing. I'm not a fan of them being very fancy. I think fancy doesn't do much. I think people want to know when, where, how, and why, and what it's about, what it's going to cost. You need to engage in active development of referrals through presentations, outreach, discussion, posting of flyers, and direct solicitation. This is where the issues of anxiety become huge. Because if the group leader is too anxious to go talk to people about their group, they're not going to be able to really handle the group. And if the group leader is not able to describe their group sufficiently succinctly, they're going to give a message to their referral sources that maybe this thing's wobbly, not stable. And it's really interesting because the interns come with relatively little experience, and now they're going and talking to their peers and trying to convince them to bring a referral to the group. Sometimes the first lessons in early group therapist life is maintaining your own anxiety and being capable of presenting your group as if you know what you're talking about. So anxiety is a huge factor because we're all checking each other out. I worked so hard to get this patient to this condition where they're now talking to me and looking me in the face and they're not crying every session. I'm going to send them to your group. Are you going to wreck them? So we get this way. We get protected. But again, communities of group therapists refer to each other freely and do well. Because I can't run all the groups that need to be run for all the variations of people. But, we've got like 12, 15 people here. If we were all referring to each other's groups, we'd do very well. Which, by the way, is the point of Florida Group Psychotherapist Society. So if we get a kid who goes down south, we can send him to you guys, and you guys get a kid who comes up north, you can send him to us, and we can all cooperate and work. Because really, group therapy is a team sport. And the more group therapists you get, the better it gets. You can't have too many. Discussion of prospective cases with colleagues to evaluate goodness of fit for membership in group. Not all gloves fit all hands, not all shoes fit all feet, not all groups are good for everybody. We do a lot of discussion, and we can because we have so many choices. I have a member presently looking to find a student. Actually, I think one of my interns is going to probably nab that student because it sounds like a good fit for our group. But that practitioner is being very careful because she's an experienced group therapist, and she knows that that student with a difficult history of family abuse will end up resonating that family abuse experience in that group room. That student needs to be in a group with someone who can handle it and who understands what's going to be happening when you bring someone who comes with family abuse. Scheduling of consultations with prospective members to personally evaluate their readiness and to prepare them for their experience in the group. So we want to be sure that we don't take someone else's word. If you're going to put someone in your group, you want to interview them yourself, and you may need to do that more than once. It will really depend upon your comfort, your experience. But when I get a referral to group, it's a twofold. It's what does this individual need and what's the right context for them. If you're building your first group in your private practice, you think wisely. You look at your caseload, you talk to your peers, you think, what could I build? What do we got? What do we got the parts for here? Group therapy can be pretty simple if you just kind of size up your circumstance. My first private practice group occurred really early in my licensure. All of my supervisors from my training, where I was in Los Angeles, they just started referring me the worst cases ever. I mean, I had so many borderline personality disorders in my caseload, it was unbelievable. And I went to Dr. Wine and I said, you guys are killing me. I got so many borderlines, I'm going nuts. He said, well, it's time to start a group now, isn't it? And he'd been feeding the pump. That's what they were doing. They were getting me enough difficult cases to put them all in a group together. So I ran borderline group for a long time. You know, one of the wonderful things about mental health practice is that there's no lack of individuals who need care. So if you can wrap your mind around how to take advantage of the circumstance you're in, I think group work can be very, very helpful. You have to orient them, and that orientation should include when the group will meet and start, what to expect in the first meeting and those that will follow. You need to stress regular attendance because group members are the group. If they don't show, it's not like we can do it ourselves. Confidentiality is huge. We have confidentiality of our content, the secrets we tell, and we have confidentiality of our identity as an individual. So if someone comes to treat into your caseload and maybe they're a television personality or a well-known school administrator or a civil servant, you need to protect their confidentiality. If you bring them into group, you need to make clear to the group that the group can hold that. By taking a more public figure and putting them in group, I am now responsible for knowing that my group can contain that. That's not all that difficult. Oh, am I frozen? No, I'm unfrozen. It's not all that difficult, but I think that confidentiality is huge. Resolution of differences between members and leaders. Conflict is an inevitability. Frequently, the conflict that gets played out in the group room is about the stories of the lives of its members. So it can be very useful, and we know that when we resolve conflict, we tend to be less overwhelmed by it. I like to be sure that we acknowledge all contact between group members, outside of group, back to group. It's one of my rules. We want to know if people are talking to each other outside of group, and I think forbidding it is a lousy plan. I myself have been a member of too many groups that had those kind of rules, and they get violated. So I like the rule, please acknowledge any contact between group members outside of group, back to group. And on college campus, that's pretty common. Can't tell you how often we hear, well, I was walking down through Traditions and I saw Sally. Sally goes, well, I didn't see you. Okay, that's, at least they're making good. We know in our groups, people are talking about outside contacts. If you're starting a group and you've got 3 and you want 7, and you're gonna start when you get 7, and you got maybe a few more weeks, at the time of the group, call all your members. So if you've got one, start calling them every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. That's when the group is. Then you got two, call them on Wednesday at 2 o'clock when the group is. So you eventually get to the place where you got the group, you can stop calling them. I think these are little strategies we use to help people be connected in that time between agreeing to join a group, but the group hasn't come to life yet. You must initiate every session in which two members who have not been together previously by reiterating the rules. We reiterate the rules all the time. Sometimes we bring a kid in halfway through the semester. Sometimes we bring several kids in. Anytime there's a new member in the room, we always review the rules. We want to be sure that everybody has heard the rules in the presence of all the other members. Well, time flies. We're moving fast. Questions?